Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining me again as we continue our study through the book of Genesis. So far, in our first three, or two, I think it's been two. Either way, we've only gotten through the first 8 verses of the book of Genesis. It will speed up as we go along here, but as we're looking at the days of creation, it's important to take our time because in it we see God's creation, we see God's power, his might, his majesty, we see his creativity. We see quite a lot of the things that God puts into us when he creates man, which we may or may not get to today. I'm not actually sure how far we're going to get today. I'd like to finish chapter 1, but that's quite a lot of verses, so I don't think we'll quite get there. But as for today, I should say, as for right now, we're going to look at verses 9 and 10, and we're going to see another division that God has done. Actually, I'll read down through verse 13, I should say, 9 through 13. It reads, Then God said, Let the waters below the heaven be gathered into one place, and let the dry land appear. And it was so. God called the dry land earth, and the gathering of the waters he called seas. And God saw that it was good. Then God said, Let the earth sprout vegetation, plants yielding seed, and fruit trees on the earth bearing fruit after their kind with the seed in them. And it was so. The earth brought forth vegetation, plants yielding seed after their kind, and trees bearing fruit with seed in them, after their kind. And God saw that it was good. There was evening and there was morning, the third day. So again, as I mentioned earlier, we see a third active division that God causes here in creation. The first one being when he divided the light from the dark. The second one, when he divides, we call it the waters of the sky, the waters of the ground, right, of the earth. He creates the atmosphere and the waters on earth. And then, now, he divides dry land from those waters. Okay? It's important to remember that oceans are not the same in this context as they are in our current world. They were much smaller, they would have been much less salty, things like that. The flood changed drastically, and we'll talk about that even more when we get to the flood in Genesis, but it drastically changed all that was going on. And so, or I should say, all that the earth looked like. Also, it's important to remember that the landmass would have looked much different. No high mountains and deep canyons like we have, right? Like one day I'd love to go see the Grand Canyon here in the United States. Um, some of the mountains that we see are just breathtakingly beautiful. The world didn't quite look like that. There would have been hills and valleys, but not these massively tall mountains and massively deep canyons like we have today. Those as well are a result of the flood. Okay? So he divides this and creates dry land. Then he doesn't just create this rocky, dry land. He creates the bedrock and the soil, and now he creates plant life. Plant life is the first life that God creates. There is no evidence, though, of any kind of consciousness within these animals, though each had seeds to reproduce, right? So that's why vegetarians have, even to this day, have no problems eating vegetables and fruits and stuff because we agree, science agrees as well. There is no sort of consciousness within plant life. They are alive in the sense that they're not a rock, but they do not have a consciousness like we do or like animals do. Okay? So we see God creates three kinds of vegetation. We see the grass of the fields. This is all spreading ground covering vegetation, right? When we say grass, we mean the green stuff, but this is covering anything. So your clovers and things like that are close to the ground. Herbs is all bushes and shrubs, okay? And then trees are all large woody plants, including fruit trees. So you see that all vegetation is included within these three characterizations. And notice that they are made as full grown plants, not as seeds. We'll talk about this as well when we talk about animals and then humans. But the fact of the matter is that God created everything already with the appearance of age. Though it is new in that it's just now been created, it has the appearance of age. So the age old question, what came first, the chicken or the egg? It's the chicken. God didn't create eggs first. He created chickens who then would lay eggs. These things are given the appearance of age. Everything from the cosmos to mankind was not created as infants, newborn, but instead in perfect working order, already fully functioning. That's important to remember. That is one of the things that people talk about when it comes to how old the earth is. They don't take into account that God literally created everything already with the appearance of age, already in perfect working order. We see the word multiple times here, right? Kind means everything was made as itself, allowing for horizontal change, right? A bulldog and a lab are both dogs, right? The lemon tree and the apple tree are trees, right? But not vertical change. A bulldog can't become a chicken, right? We've talked about this before. We'll continue to talk about it. The Bible makes very clear that microevolution is a real thing, or what we might call adaptation or mutation. The idea that something can change within itself, right? A normal leopard wouldn't work very well where snow leopards do, because snow leopards' white coats allow them to blend into their surroundings, things like that, right? We believe that that happens. It's obvious. That is obvious throughout nature. Macroevolution, which is the idea that something can become literally something else. There is nowhere in nature that supports that. And there's nowhere in the Bible that supports that. And so here we see God says, listen, with plant life, we'll see it again with animals when we get there. I created it so that it could bear seeds according to its kind. That is it. So the acorn, the pine tree is not going to be able to grow a grass, right? Grass might grow out of it, but it is not the tree that is growing that grass. It's not changed. Grass has just kind of grafted itself to it. God created everything to work in and of itself, not to change over time into something completely different. Okay? Day one, he created actually, let me start reading. I didn't read these verses to you guys yet. I'm going to pick up again here. Actually, before I do that, sorry. There are two more evidences here of literal days. The terms evening, Areb, and morning, Bogwer, each occur 100 plus times in the Old Testament and always mean 24-hour day period, right? That's what they always mean. It would be distinctly out of character for God to change that for this first chapter of Genesis and then for the rest of the entire Old Testament have it mean something else. And then the word day, modified by a number, i.e., the third day, as we saw here, occurs over 100 times in the Pentateuch, not even in the whole of the Old Testament, just within the first 5 books of the Old Testament, 100 plus times, and it always carries the literal meaning of 24-hour day. God would have to drastically change his nature here in order for this to mean something else than just a 24-hour day, right? And God doesn't do that. God is the same yesterday, today, and forever. He's not going to randomly change it and then not tell us that it's changed for this. It wouldn't make any sense. Okay, let's jump into verse 14. It reads, Then God said, Let there be lights in the expanse of the heavens to separate the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and for years. And let them be for lights in the expanse of the heavens to give light on earth. And it was so. God made the two great lights, the greater light to govern the day, and the lesser light to govern the night. He made also the stars. God placed them in the expanse of the heavens to give light on the earth, and to govern the day and the night, and to separate the light from the darkness. And God saw that it was good. There was evening and there was morning, a fourth day. This is one of the things that a lot of atheists and unbelievers have an issue with the creation account in Genesis. They say, well, he created light earlier, so how come the sun, moon, and stars weren't created until later, right? He separates light from dark on day one, and it's not till day 4 he creates what we call the light givers, the sun, the moon, and the stars. So, how does that work? Let's talk about it. Day 1, he created light, the Hebrew word or. Day 4, he created lights, or more likely, light givers. That is ma or. Intrinsic light, then generators of that light. So essentially, what God does is he creates the light, not the sun, which generates light. He creates light and darkness. And then he creates the sun, moon, and stars, which would generate that light for us for the rest of human time here. The one real reason for the light generators, as God has already created light waves, was for humans to mark the passage of time, right? He says it. Let me find it again here in verse. Um, oh no, I can't find it. Verse 14. There it is. To separate the day from the night, and let them be for the signs and for seasons and for days and for years. If we just had light, we wouldn't have any way to mark time, the passage of time. And so God creates the sun, moon, and stars in order for us to be able, specifically the sun and moon, but the stars as well, for us to track time. So the sun and the moon were not created intrinsically to create light for us. God had already done that. Now it's used for that. But their primary purpose was actually so that we could mark days and years and things like that. Light giver also here does not mean the moon generates light. We know it does not. The moon reflects the light. But both still give light to the earth. The moon reflects the sun's light, but it still therefore gives light to the earth. So why does God create the sun, moon, and stars later? Namely, so that we would have a way to tell time. That's the main reason that God creates light, is so that we would have a measurement for time. Verse 20 here. Verse 20. Then God said, let the waters teem with swarms of living creatures, and let birds fly above the earth in the open expanse of the heavens. God created the great sea monsters and every living creature that moves, that which with which the waters swarmed after their kind, and every winged bird after its kind. And God saw that it was good. God blessed them, saying, be fruitful and multiply, and fill the waters and the seas, and let birds multiply on the earth. There was evening and there was morning, a fifth day. So this is the first time he's going to create life as we would constitute it as life. Obviously, the waters did not bring forth, right? In that the water is the reason that the life was created, right? Um, it's mistranslated as bring forth. Um, in here, in this, what I read, it says team with. That is a better idea. The word for life here is nephesh, and it is first used here. It is not used in conjunction with animals, or excuse me, with plants. It is first used here in conjunction with animals. Biblically, plants do not have real life or consciousness, but animals and humans do. In God's first act of true creation were the physical elements of the universe. Everything of creation after that up to this point was him arranging and rearranging this matter to make it into what we know as the earth and the cosmos. His second act of true creation is done here. He creates from absolutely nothing conscious life. He creates conscious life from absolutely nothing. The first animals that are mentioned are great whales or sea monsters. Antiquity and the Bible speak of massive animals such as dragons existing at some point, right? That's so incredible to me. I'm not somebody who personally believes like I have friends, I know people that are like Sasquatch truthers. They believe wholeheartedly that Sasquatch exists. The Loch Ness monster, Yeti, all that kind of stuff. Here's the thing. Bible provides evidence that those things very well may have existed, right? We know, for instance, from Job that a fire breathing lizard, what we would call a dragon, existed at one point. And so you can't convince me that Sasquatch or a Yeti and things like that don't exist. I'm not saying that they do currently exist, but you can't convince me that they don't exist either. And so we see that God creates these things. And even antiquity tells us that they do. Look back through almost every ancient culture. They have the same types of mythical creatures, dragons and sea monsters and things like that. I mean, even think of the giant squid. For generations, hundreds of years, people thought that they were fake until turns out they're not, right? And so now, I'm not talking about like a minotaur or a mermaid. I'm talking about legitimate animals, right? Take the unicorn. We have things like giraffes and platypuses and things like that. We have animals that have horns, rhinoceroses, um, um, cows, things like that. So you're telling me that we have all these incredible animals, and at some point in history, a horse with a horn didn't exist? Can't convince me of that. They weren't magical like we think of it, but that animal probably existed at some point. There's too much evidence, literal written and drawn evidence that these sorts of animals did exist. I think that's really cool. So cool. And though animals will never be as precious to God as humans are, he still blesses them and obviously cares for them. Matthew 6 and Matthew 10 tell us that. He cares for the animals of the earth, whether they be in the sea, whether they be in the air, whether they be walking on the ground. He cares about the animals. And again, here we see creation differs from evolution, right? Evolution says marine animals existed, then plants existed, then birds existed. God says plants existed, he created them first, and then simultaneously created water, aquatic life, marine life, and birds at the same time. Verse 24. Then God said, let the earth bring forth living creatures after their kind, cattle and creeping things, and beasts of the earth after their kind. And it was so. God made the beasts of the earth after their kind, and the cattle after their kind, and every thing that creeps on the ground after its kind. And God saw that it was good. I'm going to finish with these few verses. We're trying to keep these a little bit shorter, make it so it's easy for you guys to watch them at a sitting and stuff like that. And after these verses, we're going to get into the creation of man. So let's finish with the creation of animals. Cattle here likely refers to domesticatable animals. Um, your cattle and things like little literal cows and stuff like that. Um, you know, um, and then it says beasts of the earth. These are most likely large wild animals, your what we would call rhinoceroses and hippopotamus and things like that. And then creeping things most likely revolves not or not revolves refers not just to bugs and things like that, but to animals that crawl or creep close to the ground. So snakes and chipmunks and squirrels and things like that, as well as your bugs and stuff like that, are created here. So again, just as we see with when he describes the plant life, even though it's only three categories, it covers all plants. Here we see only three categories of animals, but they cover all the animals. It's cool. And again, we see the creation order is vastly different from the evolutionary record. What evolution teaches is that insects existed, then amphibians existed, then reptiles, then mammals. Uh, and it actually places everything besides mammals before birds, right? So that means that it was um, marine animals, plants, insects, amphibians, reptiles, birds, mammals, right? It's not what the Bible teaches. And so we have to decide what we're going to believe. A Quite frankly, and people talk about, well, evolution is science. It's actually not. Most scientists agree that evolution is completely false. There's no evidence for it anywhere. And you can say, well, Pastor, there's no evidence for this either. You're right, except for that God's the one who wrote it. And you don't have to believe it, right? I can't force you to believe it. But don't come at me and say, well, science teaches, because science doesn't actually teach it. People that want to push that idea teach it, but there's no actual evidence for evolution anywhere in the scientific, geographical, or archaeological world. There's just not. So, brought forth from the ground refers most likely to the physical bodies having the same chemical makeup as the earth. And that includes you and I actually. Our bodies are mostly made up of carbon, right? Our physical bodies are made up primarily of carbon, and so are theirs. And it's also important to remember that when we die, including plant life, when anything dies, it might take different variations of time, but we literally decompose back into the earth. We decompose back into the earth. And so it's incredible that God knew even then what was going to happen, and he made the provisions for it. And as we end it here, it's important to see and note the earth is now ready for God's greatest creation, that being mankind. He has spent the first part of the creation days, including the first part of the fifth day here, or of the uh, sixth day. Excuse me, I had my math wrong. I just wanted to make sure. Of the sixth day, creating animals. He's going to spend the second part of the day creating humans, and we'll talk about that next week because we're at 20 minutes. So we'll talk about that next week. It's important to note and remember that creation, the story of creation, flies directly in the face of the story of evolution and what the world tries to teach. We have to decide what we're going to believe and what we're going to choose to do. Obviously, I'm a creationist. I wouldn't be teaching this and stuff like that if I wasn't. I do not believe in evolutionary creation, things like that. I used to be somebody who was like, if you want to believe that, fine, but there's literally no biblical evidence for it. I believe 7 days, 6 days of actual work, seventh day he rests. Um, Go back and watch the previous couple videos if you have questions and things like that. And as always, go ahead and post questions, whether it's on Facebook or YouTube. Go ahead and post questions and things like that. And we'll go from there. Thanks, everybody. I hope you have a great day or evening whenever you're watching this. And I will see you guys next Friday for our next video where we will look at the creation of mankind and the job that we are given. God bless, guys. Thanks.